Hello everyone, welcome to my channel on Understanding Finance in Sports. My name is Faisal Hasnain, and today we will be looking at the finances of FC Barcelona, Barcelona Football Club. A bit of background. FC Barcelona, known as Barca, is a not-for-profit private association of individuals with its own legal personality and full capacity. This narrative has been taken directly from Barca's annual report. In essence, it's a Spanish private limited company. It came into existence, was incorporated in 1899, so it's 120 years old. It's a very, very old club, and it is obviously domiciled in Spain. Barca is one of the most famous and well-known football clubs in the world. The 2020 football season, actually the 2019-20 season, was obviously hit by COVID, and this has significantly impacted the finances and operations of all sports and sports leagues and sports teams. And Barca estimates that the negative impact of COVID on its finances is approximately 130 million euros. The income statement of Barca for 2020 is therefore not representative of a proper and full season of football. And in any case, the objective of this presentation is not to analyze the impact of COVID on Barca, but to present highlights from the 2020 accounts of Barca as published. And the 2020 accounts and economic report of Barca were published in January this year, and the report caused a lot of discussion about Barca's debt situation. And if we look at some of the media headlines that came out after the report was published, FC Barcelona finances, 117 million euro loss, fails to pay players. Not sure if that should be dollar or euros. Barcelona seeking new loan to help shore up finances, says report. Barcelona's financial situation is worse than expected as new board carry out audit of cash-stripped club. FC Barcelona Football Club wins debt reprieve in bid to fix COVID-hit finances. Barcelona seeking new finance streams for 350 million euro hole after Super League collapse. These are just some of the headlines that were flying around after its report was published. And then, of course, this last note was after the collapse of the Super League. So let's look at the summary income statement of Barca for the year ended 30th of June 2020. Barca had operating revenues of 855 million euros. It had operating expenditure of 955 million euros, and therefore it had an operating loss of 100 million euros. It then, during that year, incurred net financial expenses, essentially interest expense, of 28 million euros, and therefore its loss before taxes was 128 million euros. It then received refunds and credits of tax of 31 million euros, and therefore its net loss for the year was 97 million euros. If we analyze the revenues of 855 million in a little more detail, Barca received 162 million euros from stadium-related income, ticket sales, competitions, etc. It received 249 million euros from media rights, TV broadcast rights. It received 297 million euros from sales, marketing, and advertising from its commercial partners and sponsors. It received 94 million euros as a result of transferring and loaning players to other teams. And it had other income of 53 million euros, for example, income from the football museum that it has. So total income of 855 million euros. If we look at Barca's expenses for the year, it spent 636 million euros on what it calls sporting personnel costs. This includes the entire costs of its football team, players, salaries, bonuses, etc. It spent 51 million euros on non-sports personnel costs. That includes the management team and the administration team. And its other operating expenses, the cost of running the club, everything else, 268 million euros, resulting in a total expense base of 955 million euros. The sporting personnel costs are 74% of Barca's revenues. So it spends 74% of its revenues directly on its players. And this percentage actually exceeds the limit of 70% that has been set by La Liga, and I think by UEFA as well. Let's look at their balance sheet as of 30th of June 2020. Barca had tangible and real estate assets of 228 million euros. That includes the stadium and other facilities and constructions that are currently in progress. It had intangible assets of 597 million euros. That's a huge amount. And this is to do with players' transfer fee, which is amortized over the term of the player's contract. So for example, if Barca buys a player for 100 million euros, and let's say the term of that player's contract is 5 years, while Barca will pay the selling club 100 million euros, it will amortize that 100 million over the term of the player's contract, so it will amortize 20 million a year. And the balance will be deferred to future periods. So this is the amount that has been deferred to future periods and will be recognized in the years to come as expense. It had other assets of 487 million euros, which we will look at. And at the end of the year, it had a cash balance, bank balance of 162 million euros. Total assets of 1.4 billion euros. On the liability side, Barca had non-current debts, borrowings of 443 million euros. We'll be looking at Barca's debts as well. It had provisions and accruals of 25 million, current accruals of 240 million, and current creditors of 731 million euros. Its total liabilities were 1.4 million 1.4 billion euros, and this resulted in a net equity of 35 million euros. So at the end of June 2020, Barca had equity and reserves of 35 million euros. I've rearranged the liability section of the balance sheet so that we can analyze the debt situation in a little more focused manner. So at the end of the year, it had borrowings of 480 million euros, payable to sports entities 323 million. This is as a result of player transfers, and Barca owes other teams approximately 323 million euros. We'll look at that. Payable to sports personnel 199 million euros. So payable to its players for as part of their benefits, bonuses, we'll again look at that. 199 million euros. It owed suppliers 84 million, and it had deferred income, future income of 236 million, which we will also look at. And then it had other liabilities, including tax liabilities of 117 million. So at the end of the period, it had net equity and reserves of 35 million euros. The other assets of 487 million that we identified in the balance sheet consisted of loans to sporting entities of 109 million. These are non-current loans, and these are amounts that Barca is due to be receiving for the sale and loan of players to other teams. And these are non-current. That means that they are due after 1 year. Receivable from sporting entities, current receivables for the same thing, for the sale and loan of players. It's due to be receiving 59 million euros from other teams within 1 year. So these are current receivables. Barca owes its sports personnel 112 million euros, players' benefits and bonuses. We'll have a look at that. Barca had deferred tax assets of 52 million euros, and the annual report goes into a little bit of detail about its tax situation, and currently Barca is in discussion with the tax authorities regarding its tax assessments. And it had trade receivables of 155 million, which included receivables from sponsors, TV broadcasters, and others. So it had total other assets of 487 million euros. Now, we mentioned that Barca had total borrowings of 480 million euros at the end of June last year. How's that made up? It had sold corporate bonds to US insurance company of 90 million euros. Another corporate bond to a US insurance company was sold for 50 million euros. It sold a bond to a French insurance company of 30 million. Another bond was sold to a French asset management company of 30 million. So these are all corporate bonds that Barca issued in order to raise capital. These are borrowings. Barca took out a bank loan from a financial institution of 90 million euros. It took out a further loan from a financial institution of 45 million euros. It drew down a bank credit facility of 118 million euros, and it had other bank loans of 27 million euros, making a total of 480 million euros at the end of June last year. Now, in terms of the interest rates, the corporate bonds are priced between 2% and 2.5%. They say that two of those borrowings have an interest rate of less than 2%, and two of them have an interest rate of less than 2.5%. Three of the bank loans are based on the spread over Euro LIBOR, and one of the bank loans of 45 million is priced at 4.5% per annum. Let's have a look at the amounts payable to sporting entities of 323 million that we had mentioned earlier. So these are amounts that Barca owes other teams for players that it has bought. So for example, it owes 69 million to Liverpool Football Club for the transfer of Coutinho. It owes 64 million to Ajax for Frankie de Jong, and it owes amounts to Juventus totaling 65 million euros. To Valencia, for example, 19 million euros for Nito, and so on. So 323 million euros is what FC Barcelona owes other teams for players that it has bought over the years. That's the amount currently outstanding. Barcelona also owes a net payable of 87 million to players for benefits. So the amount owing to players is 199 million euros, and the amount receivable from players amounts to 112 million euros. And what the Barca Annual Report says is that non-current and current balances mainly include variable remuneration and bonuses that depend on the performances of the player and the club as well. These variable payments are recorded when the conditions they are subject to are met and are amortized from the moment they are recognized until the end of the contract with the player. So to give, let's say an example, let's say Barca tells one of its players that for every hat trick that you score, we will give you $1 million per hat trick. So as soon as that player scores a hat trick, $1 million is credited to his account as a bonus, and that is then paid to him as per the terms that are agreed. Other payables that Barca has, it owes its suppliers 84 million euros, and it had accruals of future income of 236 million euros. So what are these future revenues? These are revenues which have been deferred, and these relate to contracts, future multi-year contracts. For example, it's entered into an agreement with Nike which goes up to 2028. So the amount that's due for Nike over the next 7 years is going to be deferred and recognized periodically over the next 7 years. These also include TV broadcast rights that have been sold by Barca to the Spanish Professional Soccer League and to the Spanish Soccer Association. So Barca has sold its TV rights to them, and they in turn will have those rights and sell it on to the broadcasters. It's got income deferred from its shirt sponsors and people who hold season tickets and memberships to FC Barcelona. They've paid in advance, and that could be for 3 years, 5-year membership. So those incomes are deferred as well and recognized once they become current. So total of other payables and accruals is 320 million euros. And the amounts that have been deferred to the future. So for example, in 2021, Barca will recognize 395 million, in 22 305 million, in 23 106 million, and in 24 402 million, making a total of 1.2 billion euros that it will recognize over the next 4 years. Now, if we look at the big picture, Barca has current assets, that means amount it is due to receive within 1 year, of 369 million euros. Against that, it has current liabilities, which is the amount that it has to pay within 1 year of 970 million euros. And therefore, its net current account deficit is 601 million euros. And it's generally accepted that a current account deficit that is less than 1 is generally considered as concerning. It means that you don't have enough money coming in to pay your current liabilities. And the current account deficit ratio of Barca is 0.55. So it's a lot less than 1. And you can see that right now, when I say right now, as of 30th of June, it had almost $1 billion worth of debt, current debt, and it had receivables of 369 million. So that's a fairly precarious position to be in financially. You don't have enough money to pay your debts. You don't have enough money coming in to pay your debts. And when you look at Barca's equity, it's 35 million. That's very, very low for a football club of Barca's size and standing. And the equity of 35 million euros can only support 2 weeks of expenses of Barca. We said that its annual expense in 2020 was 955 million. So if for any reason, let's say tomorrow, all of Barca's income stopped, it had a complete freeze on its revenues for whatever reason, that's when your reserves come in and take care of you during that period of difficulty. And Barca, with 35 million euros only in equity, can only last 2 weeks. So that's, again, a very precarious position to be in. Now, let's see what Barca's annual report said on its liabilities. It said that net debt as at 30th of June 2020 stands at 488 million euros. Taking into account that the total investments made in the development of Espai Barca is 109 million euros, the adjusted debt is 379 million euros. The development of the Espai Barca is the renovations that they are carrying out in its football stadium. So they're saying that the adjusted debt is 379 million if you exclude the debt for the development of the stadium. I'm not sure why one should exclude the debt that is due for building the stadium. Then their annual report says that at treasury management level, the club closed the year with 162 million euros in available cash. The gross bank debt is 480 million euros, an amount corresponding mainly to the different long-term debt issues that the club has, as well as to the loan for the financing of the Espai Barça. It also says during the 2019-20 season, investments were made in tangible fixed assets and non-sporting intangible assets for 50 million euros, of which the main part of 29 million euros corresponds to investments in the Espai Barça. The net equity fell and stood at the end of June at 35 million euros. So basically the annual report acknowledged the severe debt situation that Barca is in. Ernst & Young are the auditors of Barca, and let's have a look at their audit report. Ernst & Young basically stated that the accounts present a true and fair view of the financial position, so the accounts were not qualified. However, Ernst & Young drew the attention of the readers of the accounts to tax issues which are currently being discussed with the local tax authorities, and to the intangible sporting assets of 596 million euros, as they were not able to quantify any potential impairment and is quite judgmental. What they're basically saying is that the amounts that have been deferred as expenses in the balance sheet for the players that it has bought over the years, which amounts to 596 million euros, is something that the reader of the accounts should be aware of, as they are not able to quantify if there are any amounts in there that should actually be expensed out. And also the fact that the quantification of that amount is actually fairly judgmental. It's a fairly material amount, obviously. Now, one thing which I've personally felt is that in certain situations, accrual accounting, while that is the recognized form of accounting as per the international accounting standards, in some cases, cash accounting can actually be better for the users of the financial statements, because accrual accounting and amortizing things and deferring things can actually present a picture which may not actually show the reader either the seriousness of the situation, or even on the other side, the fact that the situation is actually better than the accounts show. So as I mentioned, accrual accounting is the most internationally recognized method of accounting, and that is how Barca has prepared its accounts. However, accrual accounting does have its drawbacks. Accrual accounting can show a financial picture that is rosier than reality, and in complex cases has the capacity to mislead the stakeholders, especially those who are not, accountants and don't know exactly how, for example, amortization works and deferred expenses and revenues work. Cash accounting, on the other hand, does have its drawbacks, but it concentrates on what matters most in business, namely the liquid money situation of the organization. So you could very well have a situation where, as far as accrual accounting is concerned, it shows you a profit, but in actual fact, the company could actually be bankrupt, showing a profit because it actually hasn't received that cash. If the Barca accounts were prepared on a cash basis, its financial situation would be shown to be much worse. This would be because the cost of the players We spoke about that 597 million euros just now. And the money spent on fixed assets would have to be expensed when it is spent and not deferred like accrual accounting allows you to do. Perhaps public interest organizations such as Barca, Real Madrid, Manchester United, others should be asked to prepare accounts both on the accrual basis as well as on a cash basis. I think this is something that should seriously be considered by the international accounting regulators. And I will talk more about cash accounting in a future episodes and give you some examples of what the accounts would look like on an accruals basis, on a cash basis. Maybe I'll use Barca as an example. Thank you so much for being with me and watching this, hopefully all the way. I certainly enjoyed this episode, although it was a bit complex at times when I read the Barca Annual Report, and there were some things in there obviously which I didn't understand. But thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you all soon. In the meanwhile, this is Faisal signing out.